Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this DV Trends conversation about leadership. I'm Lisa, the founder and co CEO of Dig Ventures. And for those of you who don't already know DV, we are a social business that enables civic participation in archaeology and nature recovery projects and research. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm going to hold my hand up and say that the idea for today's chat was totally my fault. Leadership is very important to me. I am a CLUR Leadership Fellow as well as a recently elected Ashoka Fellow. So this is a topic that is very near and dear to me and a part of my lifelong interests. What is Trends, this event we've all come to? It's our space for talking about how world-changing innovations and transformative ideas emerging in sort of the wider world, creative and cultural industries, art, tech, communications, social theory, economics, how all those ideas might apply to UK archaeology. We've just published our first trends predictions for 2025. So if you haven't seen them yet, do have a look, and we'll be scheduling events across the year to discuss as many of them as we can in the next 12 months or so. And I want to start today by saying thank you to the many, many people who have fed into this event with their comments and suggestions across social media, especially a shout out to the CIFA Early Careers Special Interest Group, who have generously provided a deep dive into their perspective as emerging leaders. And I'd also like to acknowledge that archaeologists and heritage professionals work across a variety of different types of organizations, lots of different challenges. And this conversation is meant to be useful and relevant to all of those environments and beyond, because really good leadership is a universal. We've taken as many of the comments on board as we can to structure this conversation. So I do need to start by saying we have to be realistic about how much we can accomplish here together in 1 hour. I'm thrilled the topic has generated so much interest, but there will be a lot of things that we can't get around to discussing today, as well as questions we might not have time to answer. But please do consider this event a beginning of a conversation. We will follow it up with future events and in other kinds of media. We're going to be starting with a link to the recording immediately following the event and some more information in next month's newsletter, hopefully with answers to questions we don't get to today. So by the way, if you do have a question for any of the speakers, just pop it into the chat and we'll do our best to follow up with that. So we're going to start hearing personal stories and advice from our speakers, their reflections on leadership styles, career pathways, values, and especially some suggestions at the end for those of you who are seeking inspiration for your own leadership journey, whatever stage you're at. And here with me to discuss this are two fantastic leaders, Dr. Pen Foreman, Senior Inclusive Heritage Advisor at Historic England, but here today with her hat on as chair of the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists Board, and Lizzie Glitheroe-West, formidable CEO of the Heritage Alliance, which is a very short intro for two very accomplished leaders who between them represent a broad swath of expertise from commercial archaeology through to academia, museums, independent and national heritage organizations, literally hundreds. You'll be hearing plenty from them individually today about their backgrounds and experiences, how they came to be in the jobs they're in today, I promise. And I am really delighted to have them both here with us today. So a quick note on housekeeping before we get rolling. There will be a Q&A at the end, so please submit your questions in the chat. Keep the chat friendly and constructive. We have a couple virtual bouncers there. And be patient if we have any tech hiccups. We will resolve them as fast as we can. So now it's time to dive right in with our first question, which Pen has bravely decided to take on board first. So Pen, what started your leadership journey? How did you come to be in the position you're in today? What is the why of your leadership?
Yeah, sure. So I've kind of been one of those people that's always put myself forward for things. And so even from the earliest parts of my career, I was always being the union rep. I was always being the gobby one. I'm from Yorkshire and from the north, so we've got a bit of reputation for being that loud, expressive people, and I've really pushed that to the fore. But when it comes to archaeology leadership specifically, I came back to archaeology to do a PhD after many years away. I worked in teaching, and I found a lot of the issues and problems that I'd found as an undergraduate and early careers archaeologist were really still apparent, and there was a lot of things I found quite frustrating. And I also noticed that a lot of people I'd come up with or trained with had left the sector, they weren't there anymore. And there's a really great organisation called Arts Emergency who have a motto of sometimes if you want something to exist, you have to make it yourself. And that's really what I like to embody in what I do. So I started putting myself forward on committees, started getting myself around tables, going to conferences and bringing up issues that I was passionate about, not just my academic things I was interested in, but also things like EDI representation, who was missing from conversations. And I just kept building that up until I sort of stepped up to higher committees, and eventually people started recommending, what do you think about leadership? What do you think about sharing? And it was quite daunting at first, but I thought, if not now, when? So just started putting myself forward and sort of go for it.
Excellent. So, it's one thing leads to another. It's the
Mm-hmm.
building blocks. Yeah, I love that. And Lizzie, what about yourself? How did you end up in leadership?
I'm really pleased to hear we've got a good Yorkshire contingent here today because I'm from right on the edge as well. You can hear my flat vowels. So my journey was a little bit different. I read Archaeological and always wanted to end up in heritage and culture, but I trained in the civil service, which and particularly on a programme that was designed to identify and train leaders. But I did enjoy it. I got a lot from it, but I really wanted to work in heritage. I really wanted to work in culture. So I think really my leadership journey, I spent a lot of time learning by watching other leaders and actually serving other leaders in the civil service. I was a private secretary to the head of the department. I looked after ministers. I worked in a whole range of different areas. And I think part of that initial part of a leadership journey is doing formal training, which I did quite a bit of, but just really learning by watching and working with leaders, the good, the bad, working out, who are the models that you want to be. And I think as a result of that and seeing in what is a behemoth of an organization, I was then able to step out and do something very different in what is and particularly when I joined the Alliance, was a tiny organisation of three and a bit, or even 2 and a bit staff if you added us all together. But I think I heard a while ago about the kind of the bullseye, I suppose, of a Venn diagram of and it's good for everyone to be thinking about this all the time, actually. What am I good at? What am I passionate about? What will someone pay me to do, ideally, is in there as well. And for me, there's a fourth one. There's what has that social good element to it as well. And kind of reflecting on this over time, I think the organisation I joined in the Alliance was an organisation I really wanted to be in. I really wanted to be in this sector. But I think I've really grown as a leader as I've grown that organisation. I'm still learning. I've been here 8 years because the organisation is still growing and changing. And I really love that. I think that really motivates me. But it also means that I suppose I'm growing with the organisation that I want to grow and the organisation that I want it to become. So I think my motivation has been just wanting to make a difference, wanting to move in with my skills to champion a sector that I really care about. And I think that's my motivation rather than being a leader per se. But I think if you're in that space and it's something you're good at, you're passionate about, you want to make a difference, I think that is leadership, and you start to then become one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point. And we're going to get towards the end of this conversation to suggestions of what people can do next. And I really feel that personal leadership, like identifying what it is that you're good at, bad at, what you want, and the direction you're heading is a really important aspect of it. I think there's this perception that leadership is this like very defined, bounded destination, really, and it's not. So, not at all. I mean, a personal reflection pen on your story feels very similar to how I ended up actually in a leadership role, which is I was working as editor of Current Archaeology, so I was in and out of a lot of places, talking to everybody across the sector, looking for stories, and I kept hearing the same story, which was basically just one of fragmentation. Like archaeologists here, archaeologists there, doing this, doing that, very little, joining together, and I don't think that's changed much in the time since I was editor, and that lack of cohesiveness, I thought about. There are a lot of people managing things, but nobody really leading anything. And that difference between management and leadership is a really important one, I think. And that's what stimulated me to do CLOR. And through CLOR, I was working on the Olympics, on the Culture Festival. And that's important because I had the opportunity to sit in on a couple of the Cultural Olympiad boards in 2012, and these were supposed to be the culture sector leaders, et cetera, et cetera. There wasn't anybody from heritage. Nobody, not from a venue, not from the NLHF, none of the funders. It was all arts, very much arts. And I thought, heritage is what brings the bulk of the tourists to this country. So, how can we not have someone in that conversation? And that really informed the sort of my approach and DV's approach, which is figuring out how the rest of the world is talking and thinking and doing in this area, and wanting to reach into that with grappling hooks and pull ourselves along. So that's pretty much my motivation. And I hear a lot of similarities. It is about initiative, I think, really. But it's also leadership in and of itself is a job, and it's a field of study, So I'm interested to hear from both of you, actually. And I hope that those listening will also get value out of understanding, do you work on your leadership as a skill or a responsibility or an aspect of your performance? What form does your learning and your practice take as leaders now? Lizzie, do you want to field that one first?
Yeah, and I think you'll hear some great recommendations from Penn of reading and things like that. But I think I have learned through doing. I've definitely attended courses, and I think there's something about taking time out of the everyday to think and to learn from others. So I did quite a lot of that in the civil service. There were specific programs, went on really great courses. And some of those range from kind of understanding yourself and your impact through to kind of models of leadership, through to, a range of things. And when I joined the Heritage Alliance a couple of years in, I did the Centre for Charity Effectiveness's new CEO course, which strangely happened over COVID. So we should have been all together in a room, and we kind of had to make that work through building an online community. We do still speak. We occasionally, we'll check in with each other. So I think there is something about making the space for yourself, however that may be, whether it be in a week. This is an example of it. I think being part of conversations as well as doing something more formal or expensive. So I think that was really helpful. Some of the training that I've done is really helpful. I think there are some models that I really like. I know some people don't really like these, but I love them. So I love things like Myers-Briggs, Belbin, and not only thinking about them myself and seeing how I've changed over time, and I think I have, but also using them as tools just to actually learn about the colleagues around us. And I think they're brilliant for team meetings. There's certain free things that you can get out there, like the 16 personalities, which is based on Myers-Briggs, and actually using them in conversation, say as a senior leadership team or kind of at any level, to really understand who have you got around you, how do you get that balance. And I think there's certain areas that are just so helpful. I know I'm an extrovert, and therefore I know that I formulate my thoughts as I speak often. But introverts need more time to go away and think. And so how do you get the best out of the colleagues around you when they might have different ways of processing information, for instance? I think also I'm a big fan of peer groups. We run a lot of them in the Alliance. We run a CEO's peer group. We run HR peer groups. We run a range of these. And I think by both facilitating them, which I do in some of them, and being part of them, I just learn so much from other leaders, particularly those who've got more experience than me. Hearing about how people are tackling problems, that kind of human to human contact, I think really builds a sense of community across our sector, and it can happen at every level. Yeah. And finally, I'm a trustee of another organisation. I took that on about 3 years ago, and I learn a lot from seeing things from the other side, actually. And I really recommend that to everyone to consider if it feels like an appropriate thing for you at this current time. So a range of things there. But I think Penn's going to tell you about some brilliant reading and probably more in-depth study than I would.
All right, Penn, hit us.
Well, yeah, I think that learning is always happening. It's never job done. Even when you get to leadership level, if you say that you've known and done everything, then you're a poor leader. You always need to be reflecting on and learning on your practice.
Great. Yeah.
And I definitely reflect what Lizzie was saying about that. Peer groups and learning from other leaders is so important. I've got a really good close group of not only friends and colleagues, but other people I would consider leaders in their different, mostly heritage archaeology sector, but outside that as well. And it's really great to bounce challenges off them and hear how they've practiced things and listen to them speak and learn from their challenges and mistakes they've made, because learning from failure is such a great thing for a leader. I think learning how to fail well is absolutely one of the key baselines. So finding out how other organizations and the leaders in them have tackled things, listening and learning to them, and listening to them both as those things are happening. So being in those meetings, being in those places, seeing them lead actively, but then also hearing from people afterwards. So that their employees or their volunteers or the communities they've worked with, how have they taken that leadership? How's it affected them? So I think listening to so many different people is like the key way of learning for a leader, because if you don't listen, you're never going to change or reflect or take anything in or lead well. But on that sort of more the formal learning side, like Lizzie, I've done some more of like training courses, especially like the Association of Chairs are really helpful in some of the training they put out, or the Charity Commission. Like Lizzie, I'm a trustee at quite a few different organisations, so it's really good to see different types of leadership. So some are very big charities, some are really small, like micro charities. So it's interesting to see how they tackle leadership on different scales, how different types of problems arise and how they work with them. It's always really great to see how they interpret leadership at different levels and different ways. It's been really helpful for me to understand how to tackle different types of problems or different types of communication or handle different groups of people. But some of the reading I would recommend, and it's actually not really strictly archaeology based or heritage based, but it really is based on sort of decolonising your practice. And the main one that I would definitely recommend is Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, which on the face of it is about ecology, plant life, looking at natural systems, but there's so much in there about what true leadership is, about what it embodies, what it means to be truly a leader, what it means in terms of the skills and the personality that is, and about how leadership is based on, well, I'll go into that more in probably future questions, but it really radicalized and revolutionized how I think about leadership. And I think a lot of the books sometimes and things that you would look at leadership, they're all based on quite sort of financial corporate vision of leadership, which I would sort of abut against, especially in a sector like ours. It's so based on humanity and people and community that I would look further into the world of books and look more into things about, decentering that, and like things like Dig Ventures' model of the way that you could do a social business. So yeah, I'd spread out the wings a little bit when I do my reading and research.
Absolutely. I completely support that. And just for those listening, we will be distributing a reading list with all of these things mentioned and some not mentioned during the event today. So I'm hearing a mix of formal learning, a mix of informal learning. Lizzie and I both access listening partnerships with people who are in our sectors. And also I tend to go way outside of archaeology. I mean, what we do doesn't happen in a vacuum. And, understanding the world, how the world of work is evolving, and, how do we foster a really healthy intergenerational and inclusive type environment, which is, ultimately going to help us make more money, which for those listening who work in very commercial organizations, we all know that that's the thing, right? But also, it is a lifetime practice. And I just want to stress for those listening who are maybe mid-career or early career, to become someone who leads, you have to be comfortable with other people. This isn't, a removed thing with the corner office, and that means you get to keep people away. Like the sum total of your job is dealing with other people, both in terms of like inspiring and leading your own team to help the organizational mission, but like the world around you is, as someone who's in a leadership position, you're out there all of the time, and so I read books about that kind of stuff. Like, what are other people interested in? What is moving the needle in lots of different places for me? One called New Power, I found really like mind blowing. I've just read one called Nature's Ghosts. Again, same as you. It's a parallel sector where there's a lot of energy and lots of people doing interesting things with different kinds of business models. That's not something that we're going to have time today to get into, but we will be talking about that in a future session. And I think, Lizzie, you also mentioned having a role model, that you were looking to in your job in the civil service, both good or bad. And I think that role models is something I've heard from a lot of the suggestions coming into the event. There's a perception that it's difficult to find a role model, let's say in archaeology and heritage. And what I want to say about that is all of my leadership role models are, historical figures or were when I started this process. And now I think about people working now in other sectors as role models. And, it's not hard to reach out and to ask for mentorship. So if it's something that you'd like, there are way more people who would be willing to have that kind of a relationship than you might think of. And it is really helpful in untangling the really knotty questions.
Lisa, can I pick up on just a couple of the things you said there? Because I think they're really important, because we've got our personal leadership journey, but we've also got our organizational leadership and vision journeys, haven't we? And I think one of the things you said about looking to other sectors, looking to how others are doing things, in the Heritage Alliance, we have our peer organizations who are sat kind of elsewhere across other sectors, and other sectors are doing things better. They've moved the dial further. And I think, being humble about that, sharing what we're doing well, but really learning from other organizations and other sectors is really, really important. And I think your point about role models on that kind of personal journey, I know we're going to talk a little bit more about good leadership. And I completely agree with you. I think it's really good to look at, whatever stage we're at, look at who is 5 years, 10 years ahead, who you like the way they're doing things. You're inspired by the way that they treat people. You might want to be either like them or doing what they're doing. And be brave, actually, and reach out to people like that, because I think, yes, they may have limited time, but I think actually we've got to put the ladder down behind us. We've got to be thinking about a legacy for leadership in our sector and not just thinking about ourselves. And I think it's really important that there's this ecosystem of care, and it's something I'm really passionate about. We don't always all get it right. We're always quite busy. But being able to see the road ahead as well as to look behind you in any role you're at, and that might even be even on your second role. You're already seen as a leader in beyond those who are just entering careers as well. So whatever level you're at, you can have leadership qualities and be a leader, I think.
Hands down, the most important message, I think, of this entire conversation. And, you're right. Another one of the questions I want to dig into specifically is, what does good leadership look like? And you've just mentioned a few really important things. Penn, do you have any other reflections on, what you think good leadership looks like? What are some of the ingredients?
Yeah, quite a few actually. It's a huge melting pot, I think. And first of all, I'll probably refer back to something that Lizzie mentioned about that, putting the ladder back down. Don't pull the ladder up once you've got into a leadership role. Give your time to support and develop others who might be on that trajectory, or even who aren't on that trajectory but just want to be part of the sector anyway. And don't gatekeep like the knowledge and contacts and networks that you have once you get into it. We're so siloed as a profession and keep little bits separate that it's really good to be able to actually bridge that, and to be able to, good leadership is being generous with that knowledge as well as your time. And I know that it's basically saying, like, don't rob the now for the future. Don't rob Peter to pay Paul. It's just like your most precious resource as a leader is the staff that you work for, or the community you work with, or your volunteer cohort. Don't shortchange them in terms of what you're giving them and what they can take part of and what they get back from being part of your organization, because in the end of the day, you're shortchanging your own future and the future of the sector by doing that. So that generosity is a real big point. And then connected to that is that idea of reciprocity. So what does everyone get out of the decisions that you make as a leader? So not just you as a leader, but what do, again, the staff, your community you're working with, the wider sector, the public, what do they get out of your decisions as a leader? Yeah. If it's always an unequal equation, so you're always getting more out of it, or you're getting a bigger bottom line and they're not getting a good return on that, you'll lose the support. And that support is important for the future of archaeology, for the future of how heritage is viewed in our society. It might work for a little bit of time if you always take, but pretty soon that stops. And I know that we're a sector that's been really built on quite rapid growth spurts and quite reactionary practices, but always relying on that and then carrying on doing things as we've always done it means that we're never going to respond to change, and we're going to quite soon crumble under the weight of what we've built there. So we've got things like potentially looming planning changes now, and we're such a fragile system based upon basically one regulation that keeps a lot of our sector afloat. If that changes and shifts and we're not ready to flex to that, and our leadership isn't ready to grab hold of the situation and be ambitious about how it tackles it, then and bring along people with them when they're doing it, then we're going to shatter and fall, and then we're going to have a real problem protecting our historic environment, interpreting it, getting people to connect with our heritage and archaeology. So that reciprocity really is the bridge that we need to stop that happening. And something that I mentioned earlier again is quite important. I think that learning and admitting to failure. We can never do everything perfect every time. Things will always go wrong. Unexpected things will happen. But if we can admit that and sort of look back and reflect on it and say, okay, we've learned this for next time, or we've learned to speak to these people, or we've learned to bring in this different group instead, then that makes us stronger for a future. I know that it's quite the antithesis of some people who go into leadership. They don't want to admit failure because they're at a certain level and they don't want to be seen to fail, and they want to be seen as a strong and, in an institution. But we need to be able to admit that we could do things better and take accountability for that, I think. And then just like the last point I think I want to talk about is something, again, we've touched on a little bit earlier, is that not isolating yourself. It's about opening up to other leaders, but also people within your organization, people out of your organization, people you might work with in the future, and not closing off any of those conversations and making sure you're open to listening to them and not sort of saying, I know how it's done, I'm going to do it this way, I'm not going to listen to anybody else, this is how we'll carry on as an organization. But it's really opening it up and going, okay, I'm listening. And then when you do listen, show what you've done afterwards, so you actually are taking note of it and not just hoarding that knowledge once you've gained it.
And I really love this question. So, I know I kind of started to talk about it, kind of to sit back and actually think about a question like this is actually really good. And I think I really echo some of the things that Pen was saying. I mean, obviously, when we're thinking about, what is leadership as opposed to what is management, the two do cross over, don't they?
Yeah.
And of course, for me, I think it's about providing vision, creativity, energy, direction, all of those things, cutting through the noise, joining the dots, kind of being able to see from that bird's eye view and looking not only within your organization, but really importantly, as we've said, outside your organization. A good leader looks out, they seek opportunities. But I think kind of on the human level, the stuff that you were talking about, Pen, I've jotted down a couple of thoughts on this, because I think the model of leadership and what a good leader is changing faster in some sectors than others. And talking about, that idea of role models and the people who we've looked up to and learned from, there are some kind of common qualities for me. And again, as Pen said, I don't always get this right. I'm trying to get this right, but these are kind of, I suppose, the litmus test that I try to live by. And I think for me, it's a different sort of leadership than, as I say, might have been the traditional norm or the way in which people might have been appointed in the past. And I think it's generous. I think it's collaborative. I think it's non-competitive. Yes, of course, sometimes we need to be putting ourselves forward, but actually thinking about what is best for the sector, for the organizations, and warm. I think it's okay to be, a warm leader, not to think that you have to put up this shield that means that you're somehow kind of different to others around you. And reflecting on that a little bit, I think some of that's about delegation and trust. I think there's this idea as well of being a sponge and a shield. So I think you want to be part of a team. We all want to be part of a team. We are part of a team. But I think there is something about thinking about where you sit in relation to others. And I think often a good leader is sponging some of the stuff from their teams, taking some of that on. We don't always get this right, but being able to absorb and solve and support on some of those things, but not necessarily pushing some of that back down again. I think thinking about, what you share, it doesn't mean not being fully human, but I think it means, not burdening and actually absorbing and spreading some of that and taking some of it away, and also being a shield, because I think there are many external things that can impact and damage how people feel within a workplace. So I think there's that element of where do you need to be the shield? Where do you need to be the sponge? But then in all of that, you could be squeezed. So I think there's something that was said already about peers and about having other trusted people that you can be learning from and sharing with. And that might not always be within your organization. It might be others who have been there and kind of know what you're experiencing as well. So I think some of those things are, it's a good checklist. Am I doing this? Am I thinking in this way? And am I on that journey of improvement, I guess?
I mean, so much to unpack in what both of you have said. We could stay here forever. But one of the things that, Pen, that you said that I absolutely love, and I don't even know if you did this, but you said in the beginning of when you were talking, the staff that you work for, not the staff who work for you.
Yeah.
And then I think
yeah,
that's really, and you said the communities you work with as well, like it's the with and the for, and like how you see yourself within a hierarchy, as a leader. And we started DV as a flat hierarchy and ended up needing more structure, only so that people outside the organization could understand who they were dealing with inside the organization. But, in hierarchies, you are rewarded by how well you execute other orders, from not necessarily how well you think for yourself. And so, what I'm hearing from both of you is that, the ingredients of being a good leader come with, the sort of purpose-driven, performance that you do. Like, what is your purpose within that organization? I'm really amazed and, so happy to hear that. And also the needing to sort of unpack your decisions when you fail type of thing. And again, in hierarchies, it's always a culture of fear, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have failed, there needs to be someone to blame. Or if anything has gone wrong, there needs to be someone to blame. And staying away and trying to have an organization that doesn't have a culture of fear, where people are happy to step forward and try something new or work with a process you've maybe done before, that's where the energy really happens. But it has to be an organizational and a leadership decision to not always need someone to blame for those things when they go wrong, and it has to be an open dialogue and a constant sort of practice. And I wish that, we have so much language around leadership evaluation, who's a good leader. There's so much that measures the sort of technical and analytical sort of management, hard outcomes, financial outcomes of leadership. But there's no common language really, or any process around evaluating the emotional side of leadership as valid sort of leadership data. And, I've been discussing this with a researcher who's done some really interesting AHRC funded research called Feeling the Feelings. Her name is Amaya Pellegrin, and we're going to send a link to that research. But she talks about, especially when you work in a cultural workplace like we all do in heritage or archaeology, and for us, we have this great dichotomy between the needs of field work, which is one huge thing that really can't change and is a model that can't change, and then the needs and what's possible for the rest of the sector, which are so inexorably tied that they're kind of held back and determined. Our potential is determined by what actually needs to happen for fieldwork. And I do think Lizzie is right. I think that we do need a different type of leader now for the way that the world is changing. Platform businesses are challenging hierarchies. Young people are coming into the workforce with a completely different experience of what it means to be at work or what it feels like to be acknowledged for something. They're used to instant gratification culture. So if they're putting forward suggestions that aren't instantly deployed, it's like, why am I bothering? We have to really dig into that stuff. And it's about more than just holding your hand out, Lizzie, as you said, because obviously we need to do that. We need to start, thinking hard about CPD around this leadership training and not just technical skills. We know in archaeology, specialists, massive bottleneck, it's a real problem, and that's more about just transferring the technical skills. It's about the leadership skills as well. And, that intergenerational conversation needs to be less about a zero-sum game that the young people are taking our seats and that means we have to leave and that therefore we're going to not create an open flow back and forth and, just flip it on the side so it's not up and down and it's rather side to side because, those skills coming into the sector are going to be important in making sure we can operate in the future, and that will affect leadership performance now. So, I really think that good leadership needs to look like a values-driven, purpose-led, intergenerational conversation with the people that are within your organization and outside.
Lisa, can I pick up on something that Magnus has dropped into the chat as well? Because I think he's mentioned, the kind of the imposter syndrome that rears its head. And I don't think it's news to anyone to say that every leader at every level, as long as they've got, some sense of themselves, will have an element of imposter syndrome. Yeah. I don't think any of us are the full package. We're all learning. I think anyone who thinks they're finished are probably finished, in the sense that I think we all have that, and we all need to be encouraging each other and actually pulling out the positive things that we see. We have a bit of a culture in our team meetings of celebrating success where everyone is given opportunity each week to actually say, I liked what you did there, or that really helped me, or I want to celebrate that thing. And you can do that in small ways. And I think, when you're going for a job or you're thinking about a role, and some people, they don't want to put themselves forward unless they can tick every box. And I think none of us realistically can tick every box, can we? And I was talking to Lisa about this yesterday, that I love the Inklings and, how they write about leadership and, thinking particularly C.S. Lewis. There's a particular quote that I just love in Prince Caspian where I think he just felt he wasn't ready. He hadn't built all the skills to take over as monarch of Narnia, and I think Aslan said that's why you're ready, because you know you're still needing to grow and learn, and you've built the wisdom to know that, and I think we all have to remind ourselves of that. We don't have to present that with a full package either, because that doesn't help anyone.
Totally agree. Yeah, and isn't that the same quote you sort of see in Gladiator as well, with when Maximus
does idea.
And Marcus Aurelius says, well, that's why it has to be you. A healthy dose of fear about those things is really useful, and it's a myth that people get to be quote unquote leaders and don't still feel that way. So it's natural. I mean, that is a really great segue actually into the next thing we were going to talk about today, which is, what would it look like if archaeology or, any sector really had a more embedded, dynamic, equitable culture of leadership? What would it look like if we accomplish a lot of the ingredients that you two have both shared? How would things be different? Penn, do you want to have a go?
Yeah, big question. So I think in some ways we've come a long way in the sort of 40, 50 years that we've had professional archaeology, but it's happened in such rapid cycles that we haven't got that embedded culture of leadership that you mentioned. I think there are sparks sort of studied through, but it's not, everywhere. It's not a universal. If it was more embedded, I think we'd have a sector that was a bit more ambitious. It would set itself higher standards and higher expectations of how we're treated and viewed by society, by policy level, by government. I think we'd have a sector that was more loud about its excellence and about the people within it. So like you were saying, Lizzie, about that sharing positive work that your team was doing, we'd do that on a much bigger level. We'd be publishing our great work in every press, and it wouldn't be archaeologists stunned or bemused or befuddled by a find. It would be a much different way of talking about the work that we do. And I think we'd be a lot less easily dismissed as part of that, or spun as being that red tape process, being a hamper to development. We'd actually be seen as more of a core value of society and more relevant to people in their everyday lives. And thinking about that ambition, I think that more than just ambition in the way that we viewed, but also in the way that we do things. So I think that with a more embedded culture of leadership, we'd have more ambition in the way that we do archaeological science and the excellence in that. We'd have better interconnection between us and the academic sector, so that our universities wouldn't have the struggle that we're having now with the cutting of archaeology degrees, and we wouldn't have that real cut-off between us and them with the academic and the field and different fields of archaeology. And I feel that we would have more impact on sort of key sectors that have overtaken us in terms of the way they're viewed or the way they're valued by society. So things like the construction industry and other industries that are sort of like have a bit more oomph when it comes to decision making, or a bit more oomph when it comes to the way they're framed. And I just think that with a more embedded leadership, we would value ourselves higher and people would value us higher. It's that value judgment of what we offer to society, basically, and to the public.
I mean, mic drop. I'm so glad we have this on recording now. I think I might just print that transcript out and send it to everyone, like hang it on your walls. Incredible. And Lizzie, what are your reflections on that?
Yeah, I think I've been pondering this a little bit. Whenever there's big change in the sector as well, when, there's loads of little organizations with lots of leaders doing brilliant stuff. There's a few big organizations. And whenever there's a kind of deck chair movement, as we're seeing at the moment, it's always a moment to kind of think about, we don't have a succession plan for the sector as a whole. We don't have a strategy collectively. And I think we need one for how to develop leadership at every level for the sector, and that needs investment. It needs capacity building. So in the Alliance, we've done quite a lot of work, particularly over the COVID period, on the professional skills, the non-heritage skills that heritage organisations need. And we've run programmes on heritage digital skills, communication skills, on those resilient skills, which include finance, but they also include leadership. And coming out of some of those skills programs, which the need has not gone away. It's just we're taking a moment, we're evaluating. We've actually got a survey out at the moment on where some of those skills gaps are. And I think there are gaps in confidence, and these sorts of programs really build confidence actually as well as skills, and I think that's really important for leadership. But also we have governance challenges in the sector. We have some brilliant governance models, but we also have organizations who don't even know that they're doing it wrong. Leadership as well, and I think particularly thinking about this, we zip around this sector. There's not necessarily a job for life in any organization in the sector. And that's why we have to bring that spirit of generosity. When we are developing our leaders in one organization, we're developing them for the sector so that we don't lose them from the sector, and so that actually we're not having to look to leaders elsewhere to come into the sector to bring their skills because we haven't grown them ourselves. And there's a comment down there, I think, in the chat about this as well. So I think we need to be thinking about this. We need to be investing in it. The Alliance is going to be thinking about this. But I think it is that, not just thinking about, there are a handful of the big leaders. There's, when we think about it in terms of running big organizations, but we're developing those skills at every level. I think we need peer support. I think we need to be actively setting up more programs, training, but also the peer support and also the networks, as well as doing that informal stuff. And I think every single one of us can go away from today thinking, who is that role model? Who is that person that, I emulate? They may not have everything right, but that I want to be learning from. Who is that? Or who are those people? And how can I learn from them? But also, who can I be supporting? What am I passionate about? Which part of the sector have I identified that needs to be pulled on? And then, where can you put the ladder? And I think for us all to be thinking about that, we'll just bring that better spirit of, I suppose, more organic leadership rather than organizational hierarchical leadership as well. And I think that's just really important, because in our sector, we just can't think in that way. But I do think investment is needed. I think we probably need, some sort of proper funded programs. The arts have done this a bit better. I think some museums have done this a bit better, and other sectors have invested in this much better as well. And we need to start articulating the need and the case for it, I think.
Absolutely. Completely agree. And just as an aside, for whatever reason, I'm not seeing the comments coming through. I might be having a tech difficulty, so I might have to ask one of you two to lead that at the end.
I'm picking some of them up, but there's a lot in there, actually.
Oh, God. Yeah. That's not fair. So the only thing I would add to that is kind of more archaeology specific, which if we had a more embedded culture of leadership, like all of the things that both of you say, and I agree, it's going to take time, it's going to take effort, it's going to take a really concerted drive to get there. But specifically now, what I think would be different is that, the conversation around what makes it archaeology a good job, like what makes it a good sector to work in, would be different. All the things that Penn mentioned would be happening, but we wouldn't just be trying to compete on salaries. I mean, obviously, raising salaries and paying conditions, getting to a level where we are competitive with similar industries like construction, for example, is absolutely crucial. But we don't have to just be held back by that because of, again, the specific conditions of fieldwork. There is no reason why we can't lean really hard into having the best workplace culture of any sector. Like, we know what makes people happy in their work. We know how to enable that. We know how to be inclusive. We know how to facilitate, good workplaces. And there's nothing stopping us from working on that and being loud about that alongside raising the rest of the things that the salary benchmarking report, for example, has just brought to light. I mean, would it be fantastic if we had a more representative workforce? Absolutely. Would it be fantastic with almost 50% of the people working in our sector being, female, that we would have more representation at senior levels? Yes. You guys know how I feel about that. But, that goes hand in hand with, sorting out the conditions of the workplace. And that might also help with another thing I think that leadership needs to tackle, which is sorting out the pipeline for entry, into our workforce. At the moment, it's a double degree situation, you have people with master's degrees, almost as a prerequisite to get an entry level job. And that's just simply not feasible, particularly with the situation with paying conditions and, the expectations of the kind of workplace experience that people have to be bringing to enter our field are also unrealistic, when we know that that's not the responsibility of universities to provide 6 months field work, et cetera, et cetera. I know some organizations have great training programs that are, some are putting people through apprenticeships. So, I can't say it's everyone, but we need to do better as a whole in making it possible for those who do want to enter the sector, whether they have a degree or not, to be able to do so, basic stuff, and I think if there was that stronger training, if we were doing better at all the things that Penn mentioned, those things would be natural and like organic. And for now, they're just sitting there as massive undone things. So we're coming to the end of our time. I can't see the questions, so
I can see them, Lisa. I don't know if Penn can.
Okay.
Should we pick up on a few of the
Well,
things that are being said? Would that be helpful?
Yes, absolutely. But before we do, I promised that at the end of this, we were going to start with first, what is the first next step? If you're listening, like, what is the first next step that you can do, in your own sort of leadership journey, to feel like you're achieving something? We can go really quickly through this, and then you guys can handle the questions. So, Lizzie, why don't you start?
And this picks up on one of the kind of little side conversations that's going on. So I've already said one. I think, think about the people who have gone before you. What can you learn from them? But also think about who you can go away from today and encourage and support and offer. People might not want to be offered mentorship, but how can you be more open to kind of providing that? And I think absolutely all of us can do that. And I think it is important to just take a bit of time to think about what are the things that from the conversation today you want to have a think about. And I did want to pick up on one thing that's in the chat. So a couple of people warning against these models, the models of that I mentioned, say Myers-Briggs or whatever it may be. I agree that we should never pigeonhole people. We shouldn't be using those to put people in you're in that box, you're the extrovert, we're going to use you for that. Or, you're the planner, or you're the spontaneous one. Absolutely not. But I think they're so useful for introspection and to be thinking about what are our strengths, what are the things that don't come as naturally to us, how do we operate? So I think taking a bit of time for whatever you feel, whether it's a bit of reading or whatever you feel you might want to take away from today, having a think about yourself as leader, thinking about what your goals for this year might be and how you can invest in yourself a little bit, is something everyone can go away and do. So I think that'd be my 2 tips.
Mm-hmm.
I just got all the chats, by the way. Oh my God.
See, I've been trying to pick up on some of the things, but there's more in there.
So, Penn, would you like to respond? What's your idea for a first next step for everyone listening?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, it's similar to Lizzie. It's a sort of an introspection piece, and it's really sit down and ask yourself, do you want to go into leadership? What's your values behind that? Really break down what your values and principles are and what they would look like in leadership. What do you want to get out of that career trajectory? What could you offer to others as part of that trajectory? And then when you know that, it's almost like a theory of change. That, okay, that's where I want to get to. Let's break that into steps. How do I get to it? What tables do I need to try and get my voice at? Who can I ask for advice or support or mentorship? Who can I badger for that? But also, who can you learn from? And, what sort of things have already happened that you want to magpie bits from, and I add that to your journey. So almost like a vision board of what leadership means to you and how you sort of achieve those little steps to it. It can break down what is quite a big thought into like little manageable chunks, and like maybe take one little bit at a time. 1 week look at one aspect, 1 week look at another aspect, and sort of then after that you'll have that little roadmap of like where you want to go from there, and find out, okay, I want to do this, I want to speak at this conference, who do I speak to about that? Or I want to be represented on this panel, but I can't yet. Who is there that I can ask to be my voice on it instead? So it's breaking it down into little steps so that you can make what is quite a big thing manageable and like reasonable for you.
That's incredibly helpful. I totally agree, and you can't necessarily expect the people who are above you, let's say if it's a hierarchy, to know that those things are important to you, that you want to go and speak at conferences, or that you want to have access to those kinds of opportunities, which very conveniently dovetails into what I was going to offer, which is just that I suggest the first step is thinking about your personal leadership at every level. Like if you want to show up in a certain way, it's about taking responsibility for your own development and being intentional in the kind of impact that you have in the workplace with your colleagues or within your chosen profession. And I love the idea of setting down a plan. Sometimes, let's say the CPD plan or personal development plans as they're structured in formal settings can be really intimidating because they're looking for different kinds of signifiers of you having achieved something than you might write for yourself. Read one leadership book and try to understand what people are saying about it. Like starting simple like that is an act of personal leadership, and not necessarily just waiting for the people above you or who you should be reporting to make those decisions for you about how they want you to show up. That is a way to actually start the process of figuring out who and how you want to be. And if you're someone who's already in a leadership chair and you've been a little bit curious about how to do things differently or better, looking for areas of your own performance and being upfront about how you can be better at your own personal leadership as well as your organizational leadership is a great first step. I mean, I do this on a daily basis.
There's a really simple model that it's not even a model, it's just a little exercise that you can do that I've always quite liked, which is just literally keeping in balance and actually keeping in greater balance the things that give you energy versus the things that sap your energy. And I think that's really important in leadership, and actually mapping, what are those things that give you energy in a job and also beyond your role that give you energy for life. What are the things that take it? And then trying to cull one and add to the other so that in balance, as you're thinking about that theory of change, Pen, that you're talking about, what are the things that you need that are going to actually give you that oomph to be able to get there? And it's a really great first exercise, because if your energy sappers are just too many at the moment, then you're going to need to add something in balance. Otherwise, you're just not going to have the energy to be able to take the time and the space and to be able to think about this.
Totally agree. Yeah. And that feeds in. I love the idea of a vision board, Pen. I'm on it. I'm going to do it. Because then that will help you track, when there's things that are, negatively impacting your resilience, like your ability to step into the work you'd like to be doing, those usually happen in a pattern, and that's not going to be picked up by an annual review. That's something that you need to be sort of calibrating for yourself. So I'm once again having a delay on the chat, so I'm going to ask each of you to pick something that you can see over there on the left and have a go at answering it.
I'll pick up one from Claire if I can, which is about, do we have a leadership problem or do we have a shared values issue?
Wow.
Which I think is a really good question. I think it's maybe a little bit chicken and egg, because if you don't have shared values, can you be a good leader in a sector that needs shared values to prosper and go for a future? But I think that shared values issue is definitely a big one, because when it's a market or an institute based on competition, can you have shared values? Because that shared value is basically, like you're saying, it's a zero-sum model, and someone's going to lose out and someone's got to miss out. So I think that's actually a really good way of framing the leadership issue, is that, okay, does good leadership then need to overcome that shared value issue and have a sort of a set of shared values for the sector that good leaders can demonstrate and be part of and, sign up to, almost, to make sure that, yes, I'm leading my organization well, but I'm also leading for a future for the sector well.
Yeah, I can literally hear hundreds of people screaming yes at you right now, Pen, really, and I think that would help with this fragmentation issue that seems to hold archaeology back, because we're never going to all do exactly the same kind of archaeology, right? But we can certainly sign up to a set of shared values. And I feel like that should be a priority for us as a sector to get to. And I know others will be listening going, but whose job is it? And maybe that's what we need to think about. Whose job is it?
And that's kind of my point a bit as well. Like, I think we have some great leaders in our sector, actually. We really do. We have some really inspiring people that I get so much energy and learning from. But I think back to that point of, we don't have a shared strategy for how we bring this on. And I think that is a really practical thing that the sector has to work together on, needs support and funding. Not huge amounts, though, actually. And look to other sectors and think about how have they done that? What has worked? So that we're not just all little islands of leadership, but actually that we're bringing others through, and we're sharing great leaders of the future. I mean, I can see some of them already that are just coming into the sector, and you're like, wow, you've got ideas, you've got passion, etc. There's another great question in there that maybe we can reflect on. It's a tough question, but it's about being disruptive, being hard. And
I saw that. I was going to go for that one.
Leaders or disruptors. I don't know. I mean, I can have a go, but I'd love to hear what you both think about this. I think, I break free from a kind of civil service hierarchy, which is very hierarchical, actually. And sometimes you are a bit of a square peg in a round hole, and some jobs are more challenging than others. Some people you're working with are more challenging than others, but you can learn something from every job. And I think there's something for all of us to think about. We don't have to be disruptive for its own sake. We need to advocate for change where it's needed. Be humble about learning from others who are doing that well. And I think it's back to my point about it's how you do it. My point about leadership being at every level, that can be from below as well in a hierarchy. And I think it's always achieved through generous, collaborative, non-competitive and warm ways of working and listening to each other. And so I think disruption doesn't have to be shouty. It can be gentle advocacy for change. It can be opening up meetings so that other people are leading. This is a really great thing, actually, that one of my colleagues in our organization is really great at leading workshops for other people and getting someone else to lead your workshop so that actually you sit back and listen. And that just a different voices leading the conversation and finding these different ways to allow for that space in a way that people might be able to feel is a bit more comfortable to bring those ideas forward. Also, not to be too precious when we get things wrong, be listening to others, and maybe our ideas about disruption weren't right. It just might be that we had to ask the question. Pen, I'd love to hear what you think as well.
Can I jump in just really quickly? Because obviously as Dig Ventures, we might have a perspective on this.
You have a role on this. Yeah, absolutely.
I just came from Remix, which is a big summit, culture, technology, and entrepreneurship that we go to every year. It's our annual pilgrimage to the future. And, those are all people who spend their lives doing that. And one of the first slides that was put up was a slide that just said, if you want to make enemies, try to change something. And so what I wanted to say to this point is, obstruction comes from fear. So if you're working with someone who's blocking an idea, that's not about you necessarily or what you want to do. It's their fear of something. And so a way to dig into that and to help unblock the situation is to try to understand what they're afraid of and maybe change tack to deal with that first, because a lot of people are like dealing with a lot of things all the time, especially if they're in a leadership role. And it's hard to achieve breakthrough with someone like that if all they feel is a stress moment coming at them from something they're having difficulty understanding. So my advice would just be is understand it comes from fear and, try to work around it in that way. I'm really sorry. We've got to wrap up. I could keep going for days. We will be coming back with more events on similar topics. We're going to have a slide up in a minute around the next event that's coming. But I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Pen and to Lizzie, who are both incredibly busy people and have come and led this fantastic discussion. All of the questions in the chat, I will finally catch up with them and read through and make sure that we do our best to answer them. So thank you all so much for joining us today. I know Lizzie has another leadership event to dash off to in a minute, so thanks again so much. Any parting thoughts before you guys go? What's your leadership word of the year?
Stay chipper. There's a lot going on right now, and I just think there's a lot of people dealing with a lot of stuff. So be kind, support each other. And I know that people are saying in the chat, kind of it's hard to be kind when you're dealing with tricky things. I'm not saying kindness isn't weakness. I think, but trying to be optimistic, I think, and supportive of others and just go that little bit further in challenging times is something that we could reflect on. It's not one word, but it's a way up, I suppose.
Mine's not going to be one word either. So I really want to leave you with a quote from that book I mentioned earlier, Brady and Sweetgrass, and it was that leadership is rooted not in power and authority, but service and wisdom. So if you're a leader, how can you serve people and where are you getting your wisdom from?
100% love that. Yeah.
Love that completely. Yeah. And I would go with fearless. These are crazy times. The world is at a constant inflection point, right? And sometimes you just really have to trust your gut and step into it and, stay locked in your values and, and be fearless about that. So cool.
Thanks for having us, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you again next month.